gentlemen.
If you are listening to this right now, asking yourself, what do the questions of the universe hold, then we must sadly tell you, we got
Nothing.
We Got Nothing is brought to you by Black Velvet Seductions. In these dark times, connection is key to keeping a healthy outlook and love for the world. Black Velvet Seductions is a publishing company who specializes in distributing literature that highlights and personifies romantic connection. With a library that fully shines the entire spectrum of the romance genre, BVS's publishings are phenomenal in tugging at your heartstrings and stirring up the most primal of intimate emotions. Located in Chatteris, United Kingdom, BVS has had a decade of setting the mood in the most delightful of ways. Black Velvet Seductions. Romance beyond words. And greetings and salutations, my delightful patrons, my beautiful souls, and welcome to a special edition of the most unique podcast this side of the eastern United States. We Got Nothing. I am the host whose jokes deeply roast, Catalyst Jost, coming at you from the lovely sunshine wasteland of Central Florida. Being joined today by a very special guest. He is the owner, a publisher, an author, and a romance connoisseur for Black Velvet Seductions, Mr. Rick Savage. How do you do, sir?
Hi Daniel. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your show. It's great. It is great to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk to people on the American side of things. Our biggest market's in America, so we sort of aim the company at the American market. I bought it from an American publisher. She had Black Velvet Seductions for about nearly 10 years before I had it.
Mm-hmm.
I took over. I started with Black Velvet Seductions as their cover artist back in 2005. I always fancied myself as a writer, although I'm dyslexic. I always enjoyed writing. And Black Velvet Seductions took me on and published my first story. And we just continued from there, really. They published about 5 of my stories over the years. And then I took over as CEO in 2013.
Now, I tried looking up more about the company itself, even based off the website. I couldn't get much. I got some snippets from the Facebook page, but tell me, you did just give a brief history on it right there, but where did Black Velvet Seductions start, really?
It started in, I think Laurie was in Indiana at the time. So it was founded in Indiana. And they published quite a few books before I came onto the scene. It's just gone from strength to strength from there. When I took it over, I obviously live in the UK, but America's the biggest market, so the spelling and everything else is all in American. We aim it at an American audience.
I could sense that. And what is it? Now, you said you're dyslexic. How does that work as a writer? What are the challenges with that?
It means that I have to have a very good team around me. My spelling is abysmal.
Bollocks. My spelling is great. There is an upside to it. I'm a glass half full sort of person rather than a glass half empty. I can sense that.
The upside is I was told at a very early age that I had a poor vocabulary, and that was because I was dyslexic. It was a problem spelling the words rather than anything else. So my solution was to use bigger words because they're way easier to spell. So I developed a stronger vocabulary on the strength of that, Also made a mental note never to be accused of having a poor vocabulary in the future. That all started from about the age of 12. But I've always loved a good story. And I think that's what keeps me in the business. I just love a good story.
See, that's what really gravitated me towards English back in high school. Like, that was definitely my favorite subject because, like, it was essentially story time when you were outside of, like, elementary school or primary school there. Like, when you're an adult, English class is very much story time.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. As a dyslexic, I felt a little bit excluded from it because I do read what I refer to as reading longhand. I read from books, etc., etc. But my world really opened up and expanded literature-wise once audiobooks came in on the scene. I've been reading audiobooks for 30 odd years. I originally, with the very early audiobooks, went to, in the UK, the National Institute for the Blind, because they have stories read to them. And I figured that would be the best way of me reading stories, having on audio content. And since I developed into that, I, really sort of took off literature-wise.
Was the romance genre always one that you wanted to explore more intimately, or were there other, like, genres of literature fiction that you really felt more attracted to, gravitated more towards?
Well, art is where I started off with the whole thing. I started as an illustrator, and I wanted to illustrate children's books. So writing and illustrating children's stories was the first, but the market is so swamped that, you kick a rock and you'll find several starving artists crawling back into the shade,
Oh, I know what you mean.
It is so flooded. And I thought, well, I'm just not going to make a name for myself in this line. So my art got more adult orientated. I became, a few years later on, I became a member of the Guild of Erotic Artists here in the UK. Although that was an international guild of erotic artists. And my storytelling and the stories that I wrote became more erotic. So I kind of guess that that's where the erotic stroke romance sort of came into it. And I was writing that fairly early on. But when I joined as a cover artist, they said, well, we don't really publish erotic stories. We publish erotic romance. It has to have a romantic element to it, which was kind of out of my comfort zone. But I learned how to do it under the tutorage of the original owner, who was also my editor. She got me into writing more romance, and I kind of took to it. I find it a fascinating genre, and it's a very popular genre as well.
Yes, actually, one of, again, going back to Virginia Wallace there, she actually posted on a blog, her own blog, about, like, I want to say a year ago, that actually explains the two most popular genres within, like, fiction media, visual or audio-wise, is in fact romance and horror. Romance because it is like, it shows how life first gets started, how it gets first created, the love and lust between two individual beings. And that then, of course, with horror, it represents the other side of the spectrum, the finality of life and humankind's fears towards that inevitability.
Sure.
Recently, Virginia had sent me some, unedited copies of an anthology you guys are recently doing. Now,
it's due out fairly shortly, but yeah, it's very, very much darker than we would normally put out. But we have put out one or two stories. Virginia has certainly submitted stories that are very much on the dark side. Some of her other work is fairly dark.
Yeah, she does have a talent for bringing out the macabre in life, definitely. So I guess where I was going with that is, now, again, they're both the two most popular genres, yet they are so opposite spectrum of this. What was the inspiration for making this anthology that is such a mix of, like, it's almost like a yin and yang literary speaking?
I don't think it will come as any great surprise to any of the BVS authors to realise that it was Virginia's kind of catalyst for the whole project. It was me reining it back, I suppose, a little bit with if it's to do with BVS, it has to have a romantic element to it, which I think a lot of the authors who write horror have kind of. I've made them work kind of hard to introduce a romance element into it, but I give them a wide latitude of rules to work within. So I kind of figured that, we've done all sorts of anthologies. We've done supernatural before. We've tried some of the darker sides of human interaction, like BDSM. So we're no strangers to the dark side of the street.
Yeah. What is it? The name of the anthology is Dark Desire, so it definitely it leans more into those more taboo and even the subjects of eroticism and physical love that isn't even talked about in the romance world.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly it's us pushing the outside of our envelope, really, with these stories. It's darker than we've ever gone before, but that's no reason not to do something. I mean, Virginia comes out with some stories. I'm sure she won't mind me talking about her. She has come out with some real wild ideas for stories.
Yes, no.
And I've never kicked her back for doing it. I was exploring. You sell this to me, and we'll publish it. She did one with a romance with flesh-eating zombies.
Wait, what? I don't think I've read that one.
No, we haven't published it so far. I've not had a final script on that one. But I very rarely do I say no. There's only a couple of topics that I will not publish in the road because I don't think that they're romantic. We have had stories submitted to us from writers that have covered what I would call taboo subjects. I don't like anything to do with minors. I can't have anything to do with underage kids.
No,
in way, shape, or form. That is not a topic that we will ever publish.
That's a little too dark.
That is that's way out of my comfort zone. But yeah, I mean that's how we got into it. Virginia's sort of wild and yet very creative.
Would you say this is probably like the most challenging project the company has undertaken yet?
Yeah, well, sort of. Yeah. I mean, it has been quite challenging. I mean, this all came to pass during the COVID lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, it was a very difficult time for the company. So it's had that side of things as well, trying to coordinate between officers all over the place, between my members of staff who hadn't seen each other for about a year or so.
Oh my!
That was kind of challenging to keep all of that together. Also, trying to keep all the writers together as well. Mm-hmm. So, from that point of view, it was challenging. The stories and their content also pretty challenging. But I mean, each has a romantic element. Some you have to search for that romantic element. Some you don't
Some
have to search for them; they're right there.
I know what you mean. I've read a
So
few of them and like very
yeah,
intriguing. I was, I'll be honest, I was never one for much for romance like the genre in general, but like especially after reading the sample scripts there and like the rough drafts, it's just that even though the romance is there, what I am astounded by is the character works and like how
yeah,
authentic like the situation or even the world they're in feels and how intimate it
yeah.
is, if you will.
Some of the writers, it's for me, it's such a privilege to work with the authors that I work with. I mean, it really is. They are such a talented group. I'm not going to name individuals, although Virginia's had more than
Right.
her fair share of name checks, but the authors are all great. I mean, they really, truly are. As sort of individual storytellers, they are. I mean, they are fantastic. They deserve way, way more honours than they've been bestowed so far. But hopefully, maybe getting them seen by a newer audience, they will, they
Right.
will
It kicks open the
close.
door for a new market, definitely. What now? What is your experience and opinion regarding the other element of the anthology horror?
The horror. Well, I suppose more as a reader than I mean, the goth horror classics, Frankenstein.
Dracula. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, all of those were part of my early reading. But I'm a huge fan of Sandman and the Neil Gaiman,
Yes,
Neil
Neil
Gaiman
Gaiman.
was an author, and he is such a dark writer. I would love. He was here. It was in a town just down from me a
Really?
little while back. If I'd have known he was there, I would have certainly gone to see him. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, Ely's about 15 minutes down the road, 15, 20 minutes down the road. If I'd have known he was appearing that close, I would have gone. I only found out a couple of days ago that it was that close.
Yes. Oh, oh my God. I would literally like if he was down the road from me right now, I would literally explode out of my seat right now and like go
Absolutely,
like, it's him, it's him. And then I would calm myself down because I would look like a blithering maniac. uh, um.
but he's a great writer.
Oh, phenomenal.
And Stephen King, I'm also been a big fan of Stephen King's. It's not only horror, but the whole suspense, the
The
supernatural.
supernatural
Uh,
elements of it really they're good at connecting you with certain life situations
yeah,
that are so grounded in reality, but so hard to process and cope with.
yeah.
My favorite was always H.P. Lovecraft, just
Oh,
because,
interesting.
yeah, he was. If Edgar Allan Poe was the grandfather of horror, that would definitely make Lovecraft, in my opinion, the father of modern day horror. And like,
Yeah,
what I like about his element is that it wrestles with like the fear of like the unknown and the fear of holding on to faith, which are I think two of humankind's biggest struggles and biggest fears.
yeah. I think you're right.
And I mean, with Lovecraft's fiction, you can't even. It's extremely hard to even put it on a visual medium because the idea behind his very fiction is that of the imagination.
And it's very difficult to visualize that kind of thing. I mean, I'm looking to see what Netflix are going to do with the Sandman stories from Neil Gaiman.
Oh
That
yes,
that should come out later this year, and I'm there waiting with my finger on the play button.
yes, yes. I'm sure they're gonna
I'm
do
not sure.
well. I'm more than confident they'll do well. Like Netflix, when it comes to these kind of franchises, they do not drop the ball. They simply do not.
Yeah.
With this new foray, this new project, Where do you foresee BVS going into the future? Like, what does the future look for Black Velvet Seductions?
Well, I think it looks pretty good. It's I don't know. I suppose this is dipping our toe into the water of a new pond.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I know there's a couple of other publishers I know that are in the romance genre that now publish romance and they publish horror. So this isn't a road that hasn't been trod by others. So I'm sort of thinking that possibly it will be a new area, maybe another imprint to BVS and actually have a darker side. We have talked about it. One of the things I do like to do with my authors when I can, and we're due for another one fairly shortly, I feel, to have a group meeting on Zoom, because we're scattered around all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Most are in the States, but we've got an Australian. We've got an Australian lady who lives in Scandinavia. So
Oh my.
we've got a load of Americans, Canadians. So trying to find a time to get everybody together where we're not getting somebody up in the middle of the night to do things.
Finding the right synchronization there of schedule.
Yeah. But we talked about having a darker side to Black Velvet Seductions. We talked about that during lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is our first step into that world. And I suppose it'll come down to how well our readership accepts this as to whether this is going to be a new road or not.
Well, the few stories that I had viewed from the snippets that I got, I think definitely you will be speaking to a larger demographic with the project. Ones that are of different, what do you call it there? Sexual orientations or sexualities, and also people who like romance but like a little bit of something different. I've also noticed some very dark comedy in some of these stories, and it just and it mixes well because like you still pertain to the goal of romance and love, but it blends it in a way that is like much more digestible to those who are not a hardcore audience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, speaks for yourself. You're. I think it would be fair to say that you're a more horror-orientated reader. Did you find the romance elements off-putting?
Not at all, actually. It depends on how one really presents it, what kind of tone, because some of the romance horror stories that I had read had the darkness was there, but again, going back to it, there was a bit of a comedic tone to it. So it kind of not only highlighted the horror in a better way, but it it kind of also painted the romance in a more better light. In one of the excerpts from the story, was that you gotta accept somebody for all of them who they are, they're good and they're dark, all parts of them. And I'm just as they're murdering people, and I'm just okay, I completely understand, and it's those kind of topics that that are very hard to digest and process, as long as you can present it to them in a way that you can connect with. There's where the goal is.
I agree, and there are so many elements. I mean, I'm also a big Thomas Harris fan. In the book Hannibal, when you're looking at a serial killer, Hannibal Lecter, there is kind of a romance going on with Clarice Starling.
Yes.
It never came out really in the film. There was sort of a kind of a hint to it, but the book it was much more of a romantic sort of element between the two,
Well,
which
yeah,
I thought was kind of interesting.
which was interesting because Hannibal was a therapist, and it kind of was playing off of the Freudian aspects of like how women choose their partners and how some of them go for more older male figures, and but obviously in a much more creepier setting. So it's like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would be a hard sell to say it was a romance story, but even in the sort of darker areas, there are little hints of that creep in. I mean, we have published stories before. One of Callie Carman's stories, she's not in this anthology, but one of Callie Carman's other stories has a serial killer in there. And that was the first of her stories I published, a book called Patrick.
Mhm.
And I know one or two of her family members were saying, well, how are you going to sort of keep a serial killer in a romance story? But she managed it perfectly well. There was that tension. There's that little bit of horror sort
Yep.
of wrapped in them. And it just gave it such a twist as a story. So,
What I liked with some of the stories that I had received there is that like the ones that kept my attention where they started off with a what you call it there, they kind of gave a sense of security, and then it slowly started building tension. Like at times like the tension was like for comedic purposes, while other times it was more pulse pounding. Like you sense this is going somewhere absolutely maddening, and you want to know where it. There's where I think the stories really will grab more audiences. That they're good at setting that tone where like
yeah.
here's something, and now we're slowly gonna build the idea slowly, like a snowball effect, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, it's one of the things that attracted me to all the stories in the book. There weren't many that we have. Most of these authors in this book, in fact, I think all of the authors in this particular anthology are BVS authors. We do throw it out so other authors do submit work, um, but and we didn't really reject that many stories from the BVS authors. Most they submitted stories and we just accepted them because of the quality of their writing. But
So a lot of
there
these
were,
guys were like independent.
yeah, there were some of the authors that we had stories submitted to that were independent, but I don't think they really grasped the concept of the horror and romance in the same story. Some were just all romance, which didn't work, and
Mm.
some were all horror, which didn't
Did
work.
not work.
Yeah, I mean, it's Virginia's is. Sorry to keep going back to Virginia, but Virginia, her story, I would say, is probably the most extreme in the book. I would say, that would
Definitely the
be
most graphic, let's say that, in terms of
yeah,
violence.
yes, yeah, and it's. I think that book certainly, or that story certainly sets kind of the benchmark for the. We couldn't have anything more extreme.
Absolutely
I'm sure
not.
she'd be very pleased to hear me say that.
Yes, yes. Now, at the beginning, you detailed like a lot about your journey as like a publisher, an author, a writer, and all that. Now, it, what do you believe is the biggest challenge for writers and authors and publishers, or those who want to be publishers, in the modern day?
Ooh, well, I suppose certainly the biggest challenge to publish. I think they're all different challenges. I think that the biggest challenge to publishers these days is trying to make money at it with so many. There are so many stories that are published these days. to try and get any form of market share is financially challenging. And I don't think that if you were to, I don't know how many publishers you've interviewed, but I would dare say that most will give you that same answer. It's the future's bright, but it is becoming harder work by the sheer weight of numbers. For authors, I would say, one of the biggest trends is self-published, which cuts out the publisher altogether, which, as a thing is fine. I'm not knocking it. But what I have noticed from one or two people, well, several people actually, that have submitted stories to BBS after self-publishing, the quality of the writing itself suffers from not having another pair of eyes looking at them. A lot of self-published authors have editors, have proofreaders. A lot do, some don't. And some of the ones that we've read that haven't benefited from another pair of eyes looking at their scripts, their scripts suffer because you become kind of snowblind to your own text, which is a subject I know a little bit about because the word blindness with dyslexia is you're not really seeing what is written down properly. And I think a lot of authors can suffer with that. So I think my advice to any writers is make sure you get a good editor and work with your editor. It's not a conflict.
And do not fear rewrites.
Yeah. I think it's an important thing. Go for the quality rather than the number of stories that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Way better to get. So that authors and publishers. Was there any other questions that I've
So you being a publisher yourself, would you say it's better to enlist the help of a big time publishing company or self-publish? Or would that I would assume that depends on what the goal is, like developing the portfolio versus actually making money off the work.
Yeah, from the author's point of view, if you can get with one of the majors, they're going to be able to publicise you better. As if you're in small publishing or self-published, the hardest work that you've got to do is get your story out there. An awful lot of writers think when you've written the end, at the end, they consider that the end of their project, that they've finished the book and that is it. Really, that's where their work starts, because there's no point in you having read, typed out your book. If you can't get it out to the audience, nobody's ever going to read it.
Right.
So I would say that to get your work seen by a major publisher, they are probably going to give you more help publicising, because they've got teams of people that can do that. With what I've done with BBS, what I try and do is group the authors together so we all publicise together.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a bigger voice for promotion, because instead of having maybe one or two publicists working for you, I've got a dozen authors that are out there publishing or publicising their books every day. And we have a great team here. We really do.
There it is, right?
I'm so proud of them. Yeah.
There it is, right there. Like, you would also, if say signing on with something with Black Velvet Seductions, like you would have access to more resources as opposed to like doing something yourself or just trying to shoot blindly in the dark on where to publicize it.
I would like to say so. Yeah. But it is a hard slog. I don't think anybody would say trying to get publicity for books is an easy thing. It's a day after day after day. It's much more of a marathon than a sprint.
It's a workout either way.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, with that being said, also, what would be your advice to those to writers, authors, and publishers regarding promotion and expectations?
Well, I mean, for promotions, you've got to be consistent. You've got to do it regularly. There's no point in publicising your book for a week or a month. I mean, we've got authors that have had their books out for maybe 2 or 3 years, and they're still publicising them every day. They just keep plugging away at it. But the numbers aren't fantastic for first time authors. You need to get a body of work behind you as an author. When you've got about a dozen books behind you, you get a momentum building. But you've got to get that dozen or so books out there to sort of kind of build that up. So I would say the best thing to do as a writer is don't do it if you're doing it purely for the money. If you're going out there, I'm the new 50 Shades of Grey author, and I'm going to make an absolute fortune, and Hollywood's going to be knocking on my door in 30 minutes' time. If that's the reason you're there writing, you're probably going to be a bit disappointed when they don't knock on your door ever. So I think management of expectations is important.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do happen to write the next 50 Shades of Grey, then that's fantastic. You never really know what the next flavour is going to be. I'm sort of kind of hoping it's going to be romance horror. I think that's going to be a great new genre.
Definitely a highly untapped genre. The story potential, so far that I've seen, can definitely break the foreground for something new and a new craze, if you will, a new fad in terms of genre popularity.
I'd like to think so. I mean, there's been some that have kind of skated on the edge, but there was always, I don't know whether you were a True Blood fan.
I saw a couple episodes. See, my problem is I'm not much into vampire fiction, save a very select few. But go on with what you were going on with there.
Yeah, but there was a fair humour with that. I mean, they were kind of sexy stories to start with. There was a fair bit of vampiric action. It was funny, it was sexy, it was.
See,
I mean, I must confess, for vampires, I'm a bit more of an underworld kind of fan.
Yeah, nice. Yep, yep. The thing about it was, when it came to vampire stories, I think because it's so overplayed, of a genre, in terms of the horror sphere there, there's so very little you can do with originality when it comes to the genre. My favorite vampire movie to this day is 30 Days of Night, because it stripped away the romance of it. It stripped away the the tropes of it. The vampires in this movie, they were essentially wild animals. I mean, they were sentient humanoids, but they fed. They were part. It almost was like an echo back to hunter-gatherer tribes from long before the dawn of time. It gave that kind of feel. They were a new species and they were trying to find their place on how to survive in this new world. Very interesting, very primal in terms of the fear.
Yeah, totally get it.
Now, quick question. How would, in terms of social media, how would you like Black Velvet Seductions or yourself to be followed?
How? Any way you like.
Fair enough, fair enough.
You have my social media links. I assume we've already done that.
Yes, yes. You have Facebook, both you.
Twitter, Instagram. We're on most of the social media platforms.
Oh, Black Velvet Seductions has an Instagram?
Yeah. BVS Books.
Okay.
If you look for BVS Books, wherever you're likely to find us.
All right, all right. And of course, oh, what was that?
No, on Facebook or Twitter, just anybody that wants to come along and say hello, we're very accessible.
Righteous, righteous. And if you would like to follow what I personally provide, please follow Catalyst Jost at CATALY5TJ05T and look me up as Daniel Evans Jost on Facebook. And if you want to see more with what Life on Saturn Productions is cooking up in the artverse, please follow Life on Saturn Productions on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And with all that being said, folks, when it comes to combining the elements of romance and horror and the journey of being a writer, an author, and the best advice to go with it in the future, flat out, folks, we got nothing. So I would like to thank you again, Rick. You have been a phenomenal guest, and I must thank Virginia for setting up this meeting of ours. This has been absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
And with all that being said, folks, please keep your vibes dope, keep your zen flowing, and as always, peace.